We are now going to look at diseases that are caused by viruses, the symptoms of those diseases, and also how those diseases can be treated. As we discussed before, viruses are not considered cells because they can only replicate inside another cell. And also, how do they actually affect humans? Well, viruses have to replicate themselves and they burst and damage cells, and it's that damage that actually makes us feel ill. Now, measles can be spread through the inhalation of air droplets, and that can be caused by people sneezing or coughing around you. The symptoms of measles are a high fever and red skin rash, as you can see in the pictures below, and there can be some complications involved in measles that can lead to nerve damage, brain infections, and even potentially death. So HIV, or human immunodeficiency virus, that is spread through sexual contact or the exchange of bodily fluids. Okay, so HIV, that can cause flu-like symptoms at first and then no symptoms. So the person almost feels as if they're recovered and they've gotten better. However, the virus itself attacks immune cells, and specifically also white blood cells, that actually protect us from infection. HIV can lead to AIDS. Now, AIDS is where our immune system is so damaged that it can't fight off infections or cancers, and actually, it means you're more likely to get ill very quickly. It's important to understand that bacteria and viruses are actually all around us, and it's our immune system that is protecting us from getting ill. But if our immune system gets too damaged, we then become more exposed to the bacteria and viruses that are around us. So HIV prevention and treatment. While we can treat a person with HIV using antiretroviral drugs, however, these can be quite damaging to the body. If HIV is spread through sex or through bodily fluids, a person can use methods of contraception to avoid unprotected sex. And again, remember, HIV can be spread through blood transfusions or things that have had blood in them. So if you can avoid sharing needles and actually use clean needles, that would be another way of preventing HIV being spread between people. We've also got tobacco mosaic virus, or TMV. Now, this affects plants because it causes a mosaic pattern of discoloration. What's happening here is the chlorophyll is being destroyed and therefore reduces the plant's ability to photosynthesize. And that means the plant's growth is affected and the plant will actually not grow as much as it's supposed to due to chlorophyll being destroyed and the plant not being able to photosynthesize as it would normally. Again, this disease can be spread through direct contact of plants or through animal and plant vectors, or in fact even the soil which the plant is put in, which it can remain in for decades. The main method of treatment is to remove the infected plants and burn the plants, get rid of the leaves and so on, and just make sure to keep a close eye on the plants just in case, again, other plants may be infected due to direct contact with the infected plant. Again, just a retrieval grid, the two boxes. We are now going to look at diseases caused by bacteria. Again, the symptoms of those diseases and how they can be treated or prevented. So remember, the bacterial cell is prokaryotic, so it does not contain a nucleus. So its DNA is just floating within the cell. And bacteria make us feel ill by reproducing, and by producing toxins that are poisonous to our cells and to our tissues. So Salmonella is spread by a person eating contaminated food, and the symptoms, as you can see, are high fever, vomiting and diarrhea, and also abdominal cramps. Now we can prevent and treat people that have Salmonella in a number of ways. We can vaccinate chickens against the Salmonella bacteria, and that helps limit and reduce the spread of that bacteria. And again, if we have got contaminated food, well, actually what we can do to prevent it becoming contaminated is have good hygiene, washing hands, making sure certain foods don't mix, and actually making sure we cook the food properly to kill the bacteria on the food as well. So gonorrhea is transmitted by direct sexual contact and is classified as an STD. And the symptoms include pain when urinating, thick yellow or green discharge from the penis vagina. Now we can treat gonorrhea with antibiotics, which we'll go on to in further detail within this PowerPoint. However, what's now become common is you've got many antibiotic resistant strains. Now a strain of gonorrhea is still gonorrhea, but when we say different strains, we mean actually the bacteria itself has got different antigens on it. We'll go on to antigens in more detail, but just so we are clear, strains are the same disease, but they just have different antigens on them. And the main way to prevent gonorrhea is using barrier methods of contraception, okay, so to avoid unprotected sex with other people. We are now going to look at fungal diseases and how they can be prevented or treated. Just remember, a fungi cell is eukaryotic, so it does contain a nucleus, which makes it different to a bacteria cell. And some fungi cells do contain hyphae, which they do actually use to reproduce to produce spores. So looking at rose black spot disease, it's spread by water and also by wind. And again, the symptoms do include purple or black spots on leaves. Now, this is a problem because it impacts the plant's ability to photosynthesize. Now, because that ability to photosynthesize is reduced, that means the plant will not grow as well as it normally would, and it just impacts the plant growth and what the plant is able to produce. So rose black spot can be prevented by using fungicides. A fungicide is just chemicals that can be used to kill a fungus or fungi. And again, affected leaves of the plant can be removed and destroyed to prevent it spreading to other plants nearby. Again, the questions in green are questions you would have done previously. We're now going to look at protist diseases, how they can be treated, how they can be spread, and the symptoms of protist diseases, including malaria. So protist cells are eukaryotic. They do contain a nucleus, which again makes them different from bacteria, which are prokaryotic. Some protists are parasites that have to live on or inside another organism. And the main way parasites are spread are through a vector. And vectors are organisms that spread disease by carrying pathogens between people. Remember, a pathogen is just a microorganism that causes disease. So malaria is spread by female mosquitoes feeding on the blood of infected people. These mosquitoes then spread that pathogen when they feed on another person that was not originally infected. Okay? Now, malaria can cause repeated episodes of high fever and can actually be fatal and cause death in many populations. So we can prevent mosquitoes breeding, we can remove standing water such as puddles, and we can use mosquito nets to prevent bites. Also, we can use vaccinations, so we can vaccinate young people against malaria disease, and therefore they become immune to getting that disease. And we'll go over vaccinations in greater detail in this PowerPoint. We're now going to look at how the human body defends against pathogens. We're going to look at how the human body defends against pathogens getting into the body, and then how the body reacts once pathogens have gotten inside. So before pathogens can infect us and cause disease, they have to get inside the body. Now, our skin is a physical barrier to most pathogens and leads us to being protected from many infections because there is bacteria all around us. The skin also produces substances which will kill pathogens, and therefore makes it less likely for us to get infected and also less likely for them to enter inside the body. But these are the main three ways which the skin prevents pathogens getting into the body. It's important that this defense is non-specific, and what that means is it is the same for bacteria, viruses, fungi, and protists. So all forms of pathogens, this skin acts in the same way. Now, cilia are just microscopic hairs that have a sweeping movement, if you imagine like a Mexican wave, and mucus is just a chemical that traps particles and prevents them moving and entering into the lungs. And again, the trachea and bronchi also produce mucus. Now, the cilia at the back of the throat, they sweep up pathogens and trap them inside the mucus, which is then swallowed and destroyed by the stomach acid, which again, as you can see, has a pH of 2, which is strong enough to destroy pathogens inside the mucus and in most food and drinks as well. Again, it's just a summary slide to show you about the body's non-specific defenses against pathogens. Remember, by non-specific, we mean if the pathogen is virus, bacteria, fungi, or protists, these defenses will act in the same way. So your mucus will still trap particles, your cilia will still sweep up particles, your skin will still block pathogens getting into the body and prevent infection, and your stomach will still have a pH of 2, whether the pathogen is a virus, protist, fungus, or bacteria. Okay, so it's non-specific against pathogens. Pathogens are microorganisms that can cause disease, just to remind you. If a pathogen is able to get past all the non-specific responses that the body has produced, you've now got a more specific response, which is the white blood cells. Now, there's two main types of white blood cells, lymphocytes and phagocytes, but there are three main ways that white blood cells fight pathogens, and they produce antitoxins, they produce antibodies, and they can also engulf pathogens. So those are the three main ways white blood cells defend us against disease. So lymphocytes produce antitoxins. Remember, it's bacteria that produce toxins that damage our cells and our tissues. So antitoxins will target bacteria toxins and will neutralize them, which will stop our cells and tissues becoming damaged. The second thing lymphocytes do is produce antibodies. Now, these are specific because they bind to antigens, and antigens are proteins on a pathogen surface. So antibodies will bind to only one type of antigen on a pathogen surface. And it's just a visual diagram to what we've just discussed. So what we've got is the production of antibodies. Your white blood cell will detect a new pathogen. Remember, antigens are just proteins on a pathogen surface. So your white blood cell will produce antibodies, specifically lymphocytes, will produce antibodies that will actually bind to the antigens on a pathogen surface. The second type of white blood cell is phagocytes, and they fight pathogens by phagocytosis. So phagocytosis is just when phagocytes surround a pathogen and they engulf it. Once they've engulfed it, enzymes, which are proteins, they are released to go and digest and destroy the pathogen, and therefore prevent it harming the body or harming the body's cells or tissues. So this is just a summary slide of the three main ways white blood cells protect us from disease. Remember, it's lymphocytes that produce antitoxins and antibodies, and it is phagocytes that are involved in the process of phagocytosis. Okay? We're now going to look at how vaccination prevents illness, and we're going to look at how if we vaccinate a large number of people, that can protect people who cannot receive a vaccination. Again, as I said before, once you finish this lesson, come back to learning objectives, check you can do them, and again, give yourself 2 or 3 days break, and again, come back to these objectives and check you can actually do them from memory as well. Now, the history of vaccination. It's been known since ancient Greece that if someone survived, for example, smallpox, they were unlikely to get it ever again. So the first vaccine created was actually produced by Edward Jenner, and he took scabs from people who had survived smallpox, and he injected those scabs under the skin of those people. So the smallpox vaccine was actually taken from a lymph from someone who's infected by cowpox, and we used it to vaccinate babies and developed it into the smallpox vaccine. Eventually now, to this day, smallpox has been actually completely eradicated. So here's a success about how vaccines can be used and just the development of science from ancient Greece up to modern day. So vaccinations contain a small amount of dead or weak. So the first exposed to the antigen on the graph, that is through the vaccine. Remember, it's a dead or weakened pathogen. After a few days, the number of antibody concentration increases because your lymphocytes are being stimulated to produce antibodies that bind to antigens on the pathogen's surface. Now, on the antibody concentration, if you look, antibodies start to decrease after a few days. Now, if you are infected with the live pathogen, so you're exposed again to the same antigen, what happens this time is your white blood cells produce a much bigger and a much faster response. So your lymphocytes will produce antibodies at a much quicker and higher rate, as you can see on the graph, and therefore they can bind to the antigens on the pathogen's surface. Now what this means is that the person infected with the real pathogen for the second time, with the second exposure, that means the person will get milder symptoms and may not get any symptoms at all due to how quickly the lymphocytes have responded by producing the correct antibodies to actually bind to the antigens on the pathogen's surface. And that is how a person is immune to the disease, because they're not showing they're showing milder symptoms or no symptoms at all while still being infected with the pathogen. So herd immunity is where a large proportion, normally 95, 97 or 98% of people are vaccinated against the disease. This means the disease is less likely to spread even if there are some unvaccinated individuals. So if we make it where a lot of people are vaccinated, a large proportion, 98% of the population, that means it's very difficult for the pathogen to spread from one person to another, and actually it's very difficult for the pathogen to start to evolve, because pathogens can only evolve once they're being spread between people. If a pathogen can only stay in one place, it cannot evolve, and therefore actually it cannot spread between people as easily. And that means even if people who are not vaccinated, yes, they can still get the pathogen, but because there's so many that are vaccinated, it's very unlikely the pathogen can actually find and actually spread to the unvaccinated person. So as we discussed, if you vaccinate enough people in a population, 98% or so, it means even those people that are unvaccinated are protected. Well, why? Because the pathogen cannot reproduce and also it finds it very hard to spread amongst those unvaccinated people because there are so many people that are vaccinated and that are immune to the disease. This is just a slide to show you the history of vaccinations and how it developed across time and how they were introduced into the UK across a number of years. We discussed measles earlier, which can be caused by a virus. However, measles can be prevented by vaccination. So it used to kill a lot of people per year, but due to vaccination, the number of people are actually much lower that are dying per year. However, it's more likely to kill people in countries that are underdeveloped and when there's a lack of access to food and nutrients that the body needs, and therefore they're more likely to be killed by measles, unfortunately. The benefits or pros of vaccinations are many. So it has been able to control a lot of diseases that were spread between people and animals. Also, epidemics, which are large outbreaks of a disease, they're being prevented if you can vaccinate a large proportion of a population. And again, it roughly has to be about 97 98%, so many people. And as we said before, back to herd immunity, even people who are not vaccinated are unlikely to catch the disease. Well, why? It's because there are so many that are vaccinated that there is less chance of the pathogen finding someone that is unvaccinated. Some negative vaccinations is in rare cases they do not always work, and again people do have reactions to them, but again these are only very rare cases that do not happen very often.